Let the dog, man's helper and friend, since prehistoric times offer itself as a sacrifice to science, but our moral dignity obligates us to ensure that this always occurs without unnecessary pain. When Albert Einstein sat down to write his obituary notes, he remembered the compass his father showed him when he was just a little boy. Turning it in various directions, he watched and wondered why the needle stubbornly kept pointing north. This experience marked a deep image in his mind, and so he wrote, "Something deeply hidden had to be behind things." For Pavlov, something deeply hidden was measuring the immeasurable. While he investigated dogs' gastric function by taking samples of salivary glands so that he could collect and measure the saliva's response to different foods, he noticed that dogs drooled with saliva before the food was presented. In 1900s, this phenomena has shifted Pavlov's interest from chemistry of saliva to research, launching series of experiments which triggered the stimulation before delivering the food to the dog. Pavlov received a Nobel Prize for his work on physiology of digestion system in 1904, at which time he decided to concentrate mostly on what he called highest parts of the nervous system. He made a key observation that saliva will flow even when there is no food in the dog's mouth. The inhibition of reflexes are triggered when the food is shown to the dog and then taken away. Repeating it several times will cause the reflexes to disinhibit and the dog will drool less and less. This evolves the individual's organism ability to learn to adapt to its environment. In Pavlov's institute, these animals were treated better in comparison to other laboratories which performed what he called acute experiments. In comparison, the acute experiments were performed immediately after the surgery, from which the animal would soon die. This type of experimentation was to no avail since it led to inevitable errors. To Pavlov, it was like destroying a perfect mechanical device just to see how it was constructed, which would show the analytical aspect rather than the understanding how the mechanism works. In chronic experiments, the experimentation began only after the animal's full recovery, expecting that after removing the partial organs, the animal to live. Pavlov favored the chronic method of experimentation where the dog would be placed under an anesthesia. He would then alter its stomach or salivary glands, collect fluids for analytical research. He became known as one of the most skillful surgeons in Europe. Like his father, Pavlov intended to become a priest in the Russian Orthodox Church, but then in the late 1860s he discovered Darwinian's theory on the origins of species. His fascination that the animal could be understood scientifically led him to leave the seminary, and he went to study chemistry at the St. Petersburg University. However, instead of chemistry, he concentrated on physiology and earned a doctorate degree in medicine. He experimented on how dogs' nervous system affected blood pressure and the heart's pumping. In 1891, being appointed the head of physiology at the Institute of Experimental Medicine, he used his surgical skills to outline the operations of what he called complex chemical factory, the process of food being processed and absorbed by the body. He observed that the saliva began to flow even before placing the food in the dog's mouth, and so he noticed another function served by the salivation. When giving the dog something of a dull taste, such as salt, lemon, or oil, the saliva still flowed. The purpose was then to protect the tongue and wash out the substance. He performed minor surgeries on the dog to measure the composition of the saliva. While the dog was under anesthesia, the tube coming from one of the salivatory glands was removed and fastened to the dog's chin or cheek with few stitches. Fluid was then collected and analyzed after the incision had healed. It turned out that the dog drools less over silicon dioxide but more over sand. The saliva helped the dog wash out the sand. The same was true for the dogs to drool over white piece of bread and meat. The question of how an animal feels cannot really be answered since we are unable to enter the animal's inner state of mind. At this time, Pavlov turned from the world of measurable to the immeasurable and concentrated on the objective of what triggered the salivatory glands such as tongue, eyes, nose, and ears. While performing the experiments, it has been noted that tension between the dogs and the technologies had produced inconsistency in the results. The assumption was that each dog should present the same reaction as the previous dog. However, the results came up different because each dog had its own temperament and personality, which altered the experiment's results. The experiments had to go beyond collecting, measuring, and analyzing. The experiment's task was to consider the normality and personality of each dog and interpret the analysis accordingly. For Pavlov's experiments, the circumstances of the environment were essential. Any distractions, such as slamming doors, street noise, or lightning effects, had to be avoided, otherwise, the experiments failed. The distractions of the dogs showed a similar effect as Joules's apparatus with weights and pulleys used for generating power. Any changes in electricity, magnetism, heat, or motion would alter the point of presentation. The dog's neural system was so precise that they learned to discriminate even between musical notes such as notes C and F, as well as different shades of the color gray. The environmental essentiality was therefore so important because when the dog learned a new reflex, for example, sitting on a floor, putting it on the table, or assign different experimenter, would cause the experiment to fail. Pavlov's final findings showed that conditioned reflexes started in the brain's cortex, which is the major signal sending device of the brain and also responsible for animals' equilibrium. His research showed the basic laws of cortex of a human's brain hemisphere. Modern psychology adopted Pavlov's techniques of conditioned reflex theory for studying brain behavior relationship. His animals were a tremendous attribution to his experimental findings. They were technological machines essential for producing the laboratory facts. Also, the dogs were considered the laboratory's essential pedagogical mechanisms for teaching and served as a most important psychological apparatus. A fountain monument to a dog was built in 1935 in the memory of the canines' contribution toward medical discoveries. The monument is surrounded by 8 canines, and the pouring water from their mouth represents their salute in salvation.